Hello everyone, the time has finally come. I'm finally doing my best books of 2021 video, and it's currently like the 18th of January, I believe, so it is coming a little bit later than probably everyone else's. It's okay, it's fine, it is here now. And we have 9 books to talk about in this pile. We're just one shy of a top 10, but I wasn't going to just shoehorn an extra one in to make it neater. So we're going to talk about 9 books today, and as always they're going to be just books that I read for the first time in 2021. There are not going to be new 2021 releases. I think a few of them are. Actually no, I don't think any of them are. No, only one. I think only one is a 2021 release, and the rest of them are just ones that I happened to read in the year 2021. And I haven't ranked them at all because that's just too much work for my little brain, so we're just going to go in the order that they appear in this very shoddy pile. And the one at the very top of the pile is Hangman by Shirley Jackson. So this was a September pick for the Briars book club, but I think I actually read it in October just because of how I am as a person. Timekeeping wise, it just didn't work out for me in September, but I ended up reading it in October, and it was just the perfect thing that I wanted to read at that time. The weather was getting colder, the nights were getting darker, and this eerie, haunting story of a girl who moves from home to university and just slowly begins to lose her mind and her place in the world. It was just everything I needed. Shirley Jackson's probably best known for her kind of all-out horror / ghost stories, The Haunting of Hill House, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and The Lottery. But the uneasy feeling created throughout Hangman is not because of the presence of ghosts, but just because of personal anxieties, family anxieties, and that feeling of being in a liminal place, of having left something behind, left your childhood behind, but not having reached the next point in your life yet, not feeling like you are who you're supposed to be or you really know yourself yet. This is my first foray into Shirley Jackson's writing, and I'm just so excited to pick up everything she's ever written because she has such a wonderful command of language, the way that she crafts an atmosphere, the way that you just get into her main characters' heads and you stay there, and it's a very uncomfortable, unreliable place to be. I just haven't read anything else like it, and I'm just so excited to see her more sort of all-out horror stories because, like I said, this one was quite subtle. It was more about the intricacies of sort of mental health and feeling out of place rather than, you know, ghosts or anything else like that. But as someone who has recently left university and is trying to figure out how I fit into the world in a pandemic, this was a really sort of thought-provoking novel that cut quite deep, and for that reason it's made it onto my best of the year. The next one in my pile is a really recent read, so forgive me if you've already heard me talk about this in my December wrap-up, but that is Convenience Store by Sayaka Murata. And like I said in my wrap-up, this is a very slim book that manages to cover a lot of ground. In this book we're following Keiko, who's worked at a convenience store for 18 years, and all of her sort of friends and colleagues are quite confused by this. They're quite perplexed by the fact that Keiko doesn't feel a need to really assert herself, to leave her job at the convenience store, to aspire to more, to want more things out of life, to get married, to have children. And Keiko really doesn't understand this because she thinks that she's fulfilling a need at the convenience store, she enjoys it, and it's a 24-hour convenience store, so clearly it's serving a purpose to the neighbourhood. Clearly people want that convenience. They want to get their groceries on their own time, but yet they don't respect the woman who works there. And you come away from this book thinking a lot about our modern society and about capitalism and the expectations that we place on people and what it means to really live a fulfilling work-life balance. There's also a lot in here about gender roles and what we expect from women, what we expect from men, and then even when those people meet those expectations or try to meet those expectations, it never quite works out and they're still never free from that judgment that we place on people. It's a book that I read entirely in one sitting, and it just left my brain feeling very buzzy afterwards. I knew there was a lot of ideas that were covered in a very short space of time, and for that reason it's one that I think I will come back to and recommend to others. And because of the book's length, you do feel like some of it has gone over your head, or that you've glossed over things too quickly that you want to go back to and really think about. But like Hangman that I just talked about, or most of the other books in this pile, it's a book that is unlike anything else I've ever read, and for that reason it stayed memorable and it's really burrowed under my skin, and that's why it's making the end of year list. I think we all know that ratings are quite arbitrary, and I think for a lot of people their best of the year lists end up being ones that they've given 5 stars to, but there are definitely some books in this pile that I gave 4 stars to at the time that have just had that staying power for me that other books haven't had, and there'll be books that I'll have given 4 stars to in the moment that I thought were really good that just haven't had that lingering staying power, and that's really the criteria that I use, I think, when it comes to the end of the year videos. I just want to talk about the books that have really stayed with me and ones that I think I will go back to. And yeah, that was a little preamble, but I just wanted to like explain myself for some reason. And the next book on my pile is Scenes of Graphic Nature by Caroline O'Donoghue, and this is another one that was in my December wrap-up, so again, apologies if you've just heard me talk about this. But this one cut very, very deep for me. We're following Charlie Reagan in this book, who is a filmmaker, and since leaving film school she has made a feature film with her best friend, but she's sort of floundering and doesn't really know what she's really doing in her life. Her best friend has found some success with film jobs and is getting a promotion, and Charlie isn't being paid enough from the cafe job that she has, and she's having to support herself by doing online sex work, which obviously is not what she wants to be doing. But the film that she's made with her best friend is about a disaster that happened on a rural island on oh my god, I've been trying to say this for about 5 minutes. Okay, the film that she's made with her best friend is about a disaster that took place on the rural island of Clipham in Ireland. My god. I think it was the close proximity of the word island with Ireland that was really tripping me up, but I think we've got it now and we can move on. But on this island there was a disaster at the schoolhouse where the entire building burnt down with around 30 people inside, and there was only one pupil who was the sole survivor because he had been called away that day by his mum. And this disaster shook the local community, and it's had shockwaves that have gone on for generations. And the sole survivor of this disaster was Charlie's dad, who she has been interviewing for the film. And what kickstarts our story is that Charlie finds out that her film has been selected to screen at a film festival in Cork, so her and her best friend go to the screening. They meet a couple of other people who have seen the film and they get to chatting, and it turns out that maybe Charlie's dad wasn't so honest with her about everything that happened on that rural island of Clipham. And so Charlie decides to make her own investigations and go and see for herself and meet the locals. So this book combines filmmaking, friendship and small island mysteries, and so I was hook, line and sinker from literally the very first page. Caroline O'Donoghue has a very, very readable writing style. I was staying up very, very late to read this because I just wanted to know what happened next. Each element of this book is really well crafted. There isn't one section at all that lets it down. The friendship between Charlie and her best friend was really, really interestingly realised. The push and pull dynamic between them and the jealousies, and the fact that, you know, Charlie is a lesbian and she has previously had a crush on her best friend, and her best friend hasn't really treated that well. She's kind of toyed with her a little bit, and all of this really builds the tension between them while they're on this island and the locals are really not reacting kindly to them. It's like a thriller without being a thriller. There's so much tension and so many layers to the story that you're just wanting to know more and more and more and more until the very last page. After having read this and Caroline O'Donoghue's YA novel All Our Hidden Gifts, she has definitely become an author for me. She has such a wonderful, compelling style and her ideas are fantastic, and I really can't wait to read anything that she writes next. The next book on my pile is Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, and this book will always have a really special place in my heart, not only because of the subject matter, but because it was the very first book that me and Bea picked for our Briar Rose book club, and we read it together obviously, and a couple of my booktube friends also read it with us, and it was just so fun to have this discussion and kick off our book club and really like solidify the stories that we're interested in and the topics that we love to talk about, and it's just such a fond memory for me. So in Cat's Eye we're following Elaine, who is an artist in her 40s I believe, and she returns to Toronto, her native hometown, because they're doing a retrospective of her artwork, and in this time in Toronto she begins to reminisce about her childhood and her school days, and particularly about the best friend that she had at that time called Cordelia, who was her best friend but also at the same time her worst enemy. And I just loved it. I love books that go into the sort of savagery of girlhood and the real violence of what it is to come of age, and all of these unspoken rules and codes of behaviour that you just are thrust into when you join high school or when you join university or something like that. And Elaine feels this quite keenly because she goes from being homeschooled with her brother and her family to then being thrust into the politics of being in a girls' school and the way you're supposed to behave and the way that you're supposed to behave around your friends and your friends' parents. And it's also about how much girls internalize from, other female role models like their parents, mothers, friends, and how we mirror and adapt that behaviour just to survive. It's a very brutal and savage depiction of friendship, but it's also so real and raw, and it doesn't deny that there are moments of love and tenderness, and the fact that the violence between Cordelia and Elaine doesn't mean that they don't love each other and that they're not there for each other. It's a very sort of grey area, blurred line, messy friendship relationship, which has obviously had a lasting impact on Elaine, and she's still thinking about it 30-40 years later. This is just an incredible character study of both Elaine and Cordelia, and even though Cordelia is undeniably the antagonist and so monstrous, you will recognise either parts of yourself or parts of people that you know, and it will make you uncomfortable, but it is just undeniably incredibly written and crafted, and I cannot wait to read more Margaret Atwood. This is my first ever Margaret Atwood, and I'm so glad I started on such a high and that we opened the book club with this one, because it is just easiest 5 stars of the year, like just incredible. And another 5-star read of 2021 for me was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, and obviously I had been peer pressured for years by the internet to read this. I was actually given it on a birthday, so I didn't even buy it myself because I just didn't have faith in myself that I would read this many pages of what people said was such a harrowing novel. But I finally read it. I finally got to it in 2021, like 5 years after I'd been gifted it, and it was just so good. Painful, but good. When people talk about this novel and you see all of the reading vlogs, people are like sobbing in the thumbnail, I think it doesn't do a disservice to it, because obviously some of the subject matter is incredibly triggering and incredibly graphic, and it is really tough going. But everyone seems to undersell the moments of lightness that there is in this novel, and the fact that at the core of this novel it is just a story of friendship. It's about 4 friends who are all dealing with their own shit and how they come in and out of each other's lives when they most need to. It's a friendship story and a love story and a story about pain and trauma and about how you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed. And it is just so beautifully written, and it is definitely one that will stay with you. I mean, you spend this much time, this many pages with characters, and you're going to remember them because, you know, it's kind of impossible not to. And that's me saying that, and my brain is like a sieve, so, I mean... But yeah, if you feel like you can hack it, it's definitely one that I recommend, because I just thought it was flawless, and immediately was so intrigued to read anything else that Hanya Yanagihara writes next. And her newest book, To Paradise, has just arrived at my local bookshop because I pre-ordered it ages ago, and I'm very excited to get my teeth into that one, because that one is longer than A Little Life, so please pray for me. And next up is another recent read that I read in December, and that is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. So again, I have recently talked about this, but this was just incredible. It's another book that I gave 4 stars at the time, but it has just burrowed its way under my skin and I can't stop thinking about it. In this book we're following Sylvie, who is a sort of ambiguous unnamed age, but I think she's a teenager. She's not yet grown up enough to have moved out or gone to university, but she's not a child's child. And Sylvie's with her parents on a sort of archaeological trip with another professor and his graduate class, and the aim of this trip is to live like they did in the Iron Age. So it's no technology, no modern food, no modern materials like plastic or anything like that. They are living sort of back to nature, back to basics, that kind of thing, in order to like learn more about that time period and the customs of that time. But while all this is happening, Sylvie is suffering verbal and physical abuse from her father, and she has scars on her back that she has to hide, and her mother is aware of the situation but is not really doing anything to step up and interfere. And it is told in a stream of consciousness style that really makes you feel like you are trapped in the situation. The way the book is written doesn't acknowledge these massive horrible things that are happening to Sylvie. It really glosses past them in the stream of consciousness stuff, and it just builds and builds and builds, and you don't really realize how uneasy you're feeling until the very final page that just left me speechless. And I guess you don't really know what it's about until those final few pages, and it just punches you in the gut, and it's definitely one that will stay with me for a while, and I really recommend it. And the next one was the very first book that I read in 2021, so obviously I started the year off right, and that was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Incredible. And in this book we're following Addie. I mean, I'm sure I don't have to explain it, I'm sure a lot of people already know what this book is about, but we're following Addie, who is cursed in the 1700s by a devil, man, thing, demon, creature, and she is cursed because she has asked for more time, she has asked for more years on earth so she can live the life that she wants to live instead of being in the arranged marriage that her parents have set up for her. But as payment for this, you know, gift of immortality, she is being cursed so that no one remembers her face. And it's obviously proved problematic for Addie because she can't hold down a job, she can't earn any money to get a place to live, she can't have any space that's her own. She lives this very transient, very untethered, unmoored existence, and obviously this causes a lot of pain and anguish for her until this time in modern day New York, it's 2014 New York, where there is somebody who finally does remember her. And it's just hit me in all the right places. It's beautifully written, the language is absolutely incredible, it's flowery, it's poetic, it's lyrical, it's everything that I love in a book. We just spent so much time with these characters, we followed Addie through a lifetime, and it's sweeping and dramatic, and I can see why people have leveled criticism against it, that, you know, Addie's like not like other girls and it's silly and it's, you know, too flowery. At the heart of it, it's a story about love and about romance and about wanting to make your mark and be remembered for something beautiful. And so I think the language and the way that it's written, and it just all reflects that, and it just really spoke to me, and I love it. I love the way that the usual writes, and I'm very excited for her next book, Gallant, which is going to be the March pick for Briar's book club. You heard it here first. Not really, because I already tweeted it, but I'm very excited to read that and see what everyone thinks of it, because oof, highly anticipated. It's very highly anticipated. And my next favourite of the year was Pandoras Jar, another one that we read for our Briar Rose book club. So our book club picks have been like really popping this year, if I do say so myself, and I've really found a couple of my like brand new favourite books from doing the book club, so grateful. Just patting myself on the back there for a second. And this book is a work of non-fiction by Natalie Haynes about women in the Greek myths that have been traditionally overlooked or mistranslated or sort of underappreciated. We usually focus on the men in the stories who sort of rape and pillage and conquer, whereas the women who are lesser known or lesser spoken about don't get their moment in the sun, and that's what Natalie Haynes is trying to rectify with this book. And it is so packed full of information that I didn't know. Even if I did know it, I enjoyed hearing it again, the way that she writes it. My personal highlight was hearing the story of Medea, because I have a personal like geographical connection, being from Georgia, that's where I was born. And even though she's monstrous and vicious and literally kills her children, which is obviously not a girl boss moment, we don't want to glorify it, but it's just very, very interesting reading about these complex, vicious, violent women, and the fact that they have been so often dumbed down in the more modern retellings of the stories. What's really interesting to me is that the original texts are much more savage and brutal, and then when we retell them years later, when society has allegedly progressed and evolved and, you know, whatever, we actually sanitize those stories and we really shelter people from like the violence of the originals, which doesn't make any sense. And even though these women should be proud of the fact that they murdered and pillaged or whatever, we shouldn't take that agency away from them just because it makes us uncomfortable, you know? But yeah, I'm not going to reduce this to a girl boss moment, because it is so much more than that. It is a complex and wonderful depiction of women who lived very interesting and very strange lives, and if you're interested at all in Greek myths, this is a wonderful, wonderful place to start. And my last favourite of the year was Snowflake by Louise Nealon. And this book is a coming-of-age novel, and we follow Debbie as she moves from her rural dairy farm in Kildare to Trinity College in Dublin, and she really struggles to deal with this change of pace in her life, this sort of onslaught of modern life and friends, and having to make friends and meet new people and deal with the schedule. And back home, her Uncle Billy is struggling with his growing alcoholism, and her mother is having some pretty serious mental health issues, and that's later diagnosed in the novel as bipolar, and I don't think that's a spoiler, but I just wanted to say it in case that's potentially triggering for anybody who wants to read this book, or for anyone looking for representation of bipolar. It's nice to know that, well, nice to know, it's good to know that it's in here if that's something that you're looking for. You could read this book. And if it isn't already obvious from the other coming of age novels that I've highlighted here, like Cat's Eye or Hangs a Man, I just really love novels like this that take place in that liminal space where characters are figuring out who they are, what they want, and what their life is going to look like. They're independent for the first time ever. You've left childhood, you're moving on to the next stage of your life, and you're suddenly given all of this freedom, quote unquote freedom, to choose what you want and how you want your life to be, and then all of the stuff that will get in the way of that. And I think Louise Nealon is a wonderful, wonderful writer. There's some aspects of the novel that isn't quite magical realism, but Debbie's mother suffers a lot with these very vivid waking dreams that she is quite plagued by, and she talks to Debbie about these dreams that she believes are almost kind of prophetic in nature, and Debbie does start to sort of believe it a little bit, and it's very, very interesting how real life and dream life blurs for her. And for me, I remember that feeling of, you know, being a teenager and dreaming so much and picturing so much of what your life is going to look like, and the fact that that sort of does bleed over into what you expect from your daily life. And the writing in this novel really conveyed that sort of stark contrast between dreams and reality, and what it feels like at that age to have so much agency but then also not be in control at all. So yeah, that is everything. Those are my 9 favourite books that I read in the year of 2021. I am hoping that 2022 will give me some more wonderful books to read, some more coming of age novels I'm sure will be on my list next year. Please do let me know what your favourite book of 2021 was. I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Bye.